Hello everybody and welcome to this podcast, Building for Peace with Hannah Jewell. Today we have Sara Loiperdinger, a hypnotherapist here in Sussex, to share her story of coming into alternative medicine to talk to us about hypnotherapy and the world of complementary healing. Sara, it's such a delight to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, just to start out with, what is hypnotherapy?
It's a question I get asked a lot. So the way that I explain hypnotherapy is it's a way of understanding our existing beliefs that we have around ourselves and the world that may have been formed at times in childhood, and working with these beliefs, uncovering them to release beliefs that are maybe not so helpful in everyday life, that we're not aware that we have. So the idea behind hypnosis as part of that therapy is that once we're in a more relaxed state, that we can open ourselves up to allowing memories, thoughts, feelings to arise, which show us more about where these beliefs and ideas that we hold may come from. So it's really a way of accessing knowledge that we already possess in a gentle and focused way. And then there's different techniques that we can work through that.
Okay, that's really fascinating. From what you said, it's centered around belief. And so does hypnotherapy work with the idea that our thoughts determine how our lives are lived?
Yeah, very much so. Our beliefs, as you may know in your own practice, without knowing it, can have a physiological experience on the body. So the idea behind hypnotherapy is that if we believe there is a threat, our body will respond to it whether the threat is real or not. So it's understanding that we hold these beliefs which maybe are not helpful in everyday life. So we respond to an email that we receive from our boss in the same way as we would to a threat to our lives. And it's kind of working through that and understanding where that original fear and thought form comes from through the use of hypnosis.
Fear is a wonderful example. Are there certain qualities of beliefs that you see often that are positively affected by hypnotherapy?
Yeah, so a person's view of themselves and their world, their beliefs, the ideas they have, that creates their reality. And that is unique for everyone because our lives are unique in our experiences. A symptom that I see quite regularly is anxiety, and that is the fear of something that's about to happen, something imagined that we focus on to varying extents, and that idea of something happening creates a reaction in our body. So that might be, different forms of anxiety, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, that kind of thing. And some common themes might be public speaking, speaking in front of people, social anxiety, being around people. And so it's really understanding where that comes from, where that belief was formed, and then working with what was not processed at the time.
Okay. Hypnotherapy is a vast field. It can be done in a number of ways, and there are probably different schools in hypnotherapy, how it's utilized, what the techniques are. And some of those could be closer to psychotherapy, and some could be radically different, even more veering towards shamanism. Could you speak to us about that, the scope and range of hypnotherapy?
Yeah. So, hypnotherapy, there's different, as you said, there's different approaches, and it almost varies so greatly, so that your experience could be quite different depending on who you see and what their approach is, and their lived experience, their personal journey that they bring, and that knowledge. So the way that I personally work is much more focused on what the innate wisdom is of the client that is coming to the session, and providing a space in which they can access that, and then journeying in a way likened to shamanism, in which we can explore different ways of understanding those beliefs, and that might be bringing in more helpful ideas in various ways, and but very much guided by the client's worldview and intuition as well. Other systems, for example, would be much more solutions focused, where there's very specific techniques. It also crosses into NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and the idea that there's less focus about what happened and kind of resolving that and processing, and it's more about much more suggestive focused, so providing tools that can be adapted by the person through different methods, repetition, different kind of techniques, that they can adapt and then progress that way.
Okay, so in that way of working with hypnotherapy, the hypnotherapist is providing suggestive prompts while the client or patient is under the state of hypnosis, according to their intention, say to stop smoking or something like this, which is fine. That's one way of working. But what you are doing is getting more to what the underlying cause might be, where this behavior stemmed from in the first place. Is that a personal passion to you, or is there a specific school of training or school of thought or way of working that you were attracted to?
So that school of training, that was specifically something that I was drawn to, and uncovering what the root cause of an issue is seemed for me vital for healing to happen. So my teacher, who I trained with, very much embodies that approach. There is always an element of suggestion, of solution-focused work within that, but it's not the sole focus. So it depends what someone brings, and each session is completely unique. But in essence, if someone brings something to the session and they have triggers in daily life, those triggers or reactions that are maybe not easily controllable, someone says something that causes them anger and they can't really rationalize it in the moment, anxiety that can be triggered by certain situations, being in traffic if there was an incident. So the way that I work is firstly understanding if there is a cause that seems to come from the past or from a moment in time, and then that is what would need to be worked on first, and then we can focus on the solution aspect and how to bring in the more positive beliefs to help them move forward.
Okay, so how is this potential trigger that is rooted in the past ascertained? Is that through a consultation process, or does that also happen under hypnosis, or it's likely a combination, but can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so often it's apparent And often it's even the client themselves will be surprised where something comes from. So it's a bit of a combination. In the consultation, we can establish what someone's bringing to the session, what they want to work on, and in that process there's some techniques that we can already start using in the conscious realm. What I'm looking for is where there are like little touch points of resistance. So when someone speaks, you can tell, one, what their motivations are for change. Is it something that they want to bring in or something they want to avoid? So, for example, if someone wants to stop smoking, then is their motivation to become healthy, or is it to avoid being ill? And that'll be what's showing me what's more powerful to work with in the session. So there's little things like that I can already pick up. Naturally, we tend to avoid what's uncomfortable. That's our innate state of seeking safety. So there'll be little ways of sort of teasing that out of people, because by nature we don't want to go where there's fear or doesn't feel safe. So that's also something I'm looking for, where those points are. And a session would look like pretty much the first half would be that kind of consultation, establishing what the story is that the client brings. And then we go into hypnosis, which is a much more, the way that I do it, it's much more gentle. It's had a bit of a bad rep from stage hypnotists in the 70s, where people think, I'm going to lose control and you're going to do something to me. So it's not like that at all. It's much more like a guided meditation. We do an autogenic relaxation, relaxing the body and getting someone to really tune in. So that's the first step, just bringing their attention inwards. And for some people that's enough. And everyone's got a different level of depth that they can go to. But we work with whatever that point is. And once we've established that safe place, the way that I bring in the focus of the session is to remind the client that what we're there to do is just understand ourselves deeper. And so whatever comes up, we're there to observe it, and it's sort of already creating that level of distance, that we're just there to pay attention and learn, rather than get lost in the story.
Right, so we don't want to reactivate that root cause or relive it again.
It depends. So what can be very helpful is if there was something in the past that hasn't fully been processed. So we see this a lot with children. They have a more reduced understanding of the world based on their level of experience. So if something occurs that they find confusing or even traumatic, they will not have the existing coping mechanisms to actually process and deal with that like a 30, 40-year-old adult would. So they will in that moment create a coping mechanism that works for them at that time. And that might be to avoid, to hide. It might be to release emotion or whatever it might be in that moment. But if that confusion or that state of conflict, not understanding what's going on, if that isn't fully processed at the time, then it's almost like that part of us always stays there. So that's what then gets triggered 20 years later, when we may not be making that connection. And what can be helpful in a session is to go back to that place, but from that place of distance, allowing those feelings to come up that were felt at the time in a gentle way, and sort of but not avoiding, because that's what's been happening for so long. And then once we can actually realize what was going on, and I'm using this example as a child because that tends to come up a lot, we need to almost reframe what happened. So bringing in a support mechanism for that child. What do they need? They need an adult to come in and explain what's happened. Or they need someone to come and just put their arms around them and say, you don't need to worry about this right now, I've got this. And that in itself can be very healing. Because, that's almost allowing them to release what wasn't released at the time and feel safe in that process.
You know, we do this in shamanism as well, when we're doing inner child work. And we travel back to a moment, which is sometimes a surprise. Oh, I didn't realize that was what's driving me. Or sometimes it's known. And we give the child what they need. In shamanism, it's going to be protection, it's going to be love, it's going to be safety, putting safety around them. It's going to be sweetness many times, acknowledgement. It's going to be them bringing that child back into the heart where it knows it's safe to mature. In this way, there are some links between shamanism and hypnotherapy. Shamanism, of course, does many other things, but I'm really feeling this resonance here, which stands out to me as a methodology that is different than psychotherapy, because it's not the mind talking about it. It's a release. And you're saying a reframing. In shamanism, we would say that the neurological pathways are actually being shifted in the moment. And what's fascinating to me is that in hypnotherapy, you're not journeying to another dimension to do this, and the mind is involved. When a person goes into hypnosis, do they check out, or are they present in some way?
They're completely present. If they were to check out, then we wouldn't be able to do the therapy. I mean, it can still have benefit if that happens, but it's the place we want to keep them is almost that relaxed state just before going to sleep, where you're still present. And that's where a lot of this can really come alive and the work can be done. But it's, I would say, looking back at the history of hypnotherapy, in the way that I practice, the first hypnotherapists as such were shamans, because they worked with these states and they understood there's the intuition that's here that guides us. And it's just accessing that through a different level of awareness. So, tell us a little bit about the history of hypnotherapy in the context of Western medicine. I mean, is it linked to things like the spiritualist movement, or because that, in the 1900s all the way through the 1970s, stage hypnosis and seances where you're calling in spirits and they give you a sign. These things were kind of in a similar arena, yet now it's fairly medicalized. Talk to us about that journey. So where it starts to become documented is with a German physician called Franz Mesmer, and that was in the late 18th century. So he worked predominantly in Vienna and Paris, and he developed this idea, which was quite different at that time, that he actually wrote his doctorate on the idea that the planets, the sun and the moon, actually influence the human body, which at this time in the medical field was quite unusual. And he developed this this methodology of working, which he called animal magnetism.
Okay, what's that?
And it's got a bit of a bizarre name, but you'll recognize this. It's the idea that the planets have an influence on our system, as well as what he found working with people. He called them fluids of channels running through the body. And when these channels were blocked, there would be disease or ill health. And so the work that he did through the use of magnets, because he understood that there was a sense of polarity within the body.
Right, okay.
But he created these actual rods and things, and he worked with these magnets to create the flows of these fluids in the body, to unblock them, and the idea is if they're running smoothly, then there is health. And along with that, in his way of wording it at the time, was the power of the mind, which maybe now we would call intentional awareness.
Okay.
So these three main components created a system that he then worked with.
Environment, prana, and thought. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But coming off the back of Newtonian physics, which was very much the opposite. Everything, if we looked at the human body, the medical approach that was adapted based on Newton was there is a main function for every part, and together they work based on their individual functions and create the whole. And that was pretty much it. So the idea that there were these other elements, the mind, and he also believed that there was this energetic force that ran through all living beings, and that there was a energetic transmission between animate and inanimate objects constantly, and that's where this magnetism comes in, and the power of the mind. But he received so much criticism because of his approach. One of his clients was actually Marie Antoinette, and her husband, being King Louis XVI, actually hired a group of scientists to investigate his methods. And they, based on their methods of understanding science, they deemed them to not work.
Okay.
So, and Benjamin Franklin was one of these scientists. And he actually said that one of the conclusions that they did make was that there does seem to be an element of the mind and the imagination that does have an effect on our state of being.
This is really fascinating because we are at a moment in time where the scientific foundations that were established in the last 200 years are losing their hold upon us, and we're opening to different possibilities. And Benjamin Franklin, we know the story of the key and the lightning bolt and electricity. But meanwhile, we had Tesla's whole thing about electricity freely circulating through space that could be harnessed by almost anybody at any time, which magnetism, electricity, interpenetration with all living things, connectivity, prana, these are the sorts of things which are ancient sciences, but we're opening to in a new way now. And hypnotherapy has been a part of that.
Yeah.
Does hypnotherapy have an intersection with the work of Freud or Jung or that whole psychotherapy tradition?
It does. So mesmer, where the word mesmerize comes from, he actually developed the first sort of group therapy setting because he was so inundated with clients when he was in Paris that he had to see them all at the same time sometimes. And he had them hold hands because he understood that the body was a conductor. So he used that. But after this scientific investigation, he sort of stopped working, and it was actually his students that then continued and developed what we now know as hypnosis today. And there's been many stages of that, and some of the more recent ones, Freud did explore hypnosis, and because he chose to go down a slightly different avenue of more analysis, because of his denouncing of hypnotherapy, that sort of framed the psychology framework that we use today. But there have been key figures that have continued that work. Milton Erickson, Dave Ellman, and the terminology was actually then changed to hypnosis, which means sleep in Greek. And when that shift happened towards the beginning of the 20th century, that was sort of that was a separation from Mesmer's work and a beginning of something else that then, evolved to what we know today.
Well, Sara, how did you get into hypnosis? I have my own story of hypnosis, having been hypnotized as a teenager at the Mid-State Fair by a stage hypnotist, and feeling myself go blank and black in my mind, understanding that my limbs were moving, and waking up on stage in front of everybody exclaiming I was one of the Muppets. But later I experienced actual hypnotherapy or hypnosis, which was incredibly healing, and which led me to my first encounter with a spirit guide or teacher and set me on a different course in my life. So what is your story? How did hypnosis come to you? And I know there's a backside to that story as well.
Yeah, so how far back do we go? I guess I've always been interested in the unknown. I've always been fascinated by dreams, and that interest has always been there, along with the just the desire to understand people and their motivations. So that was always there. I did contemplate studying psychology, as that was the only thing I could imagine to be. I didn't really know about hypnotherapy back then, but I did end up going down the design and creative route instead. And a part of that decision making was that I hadn't quite got to terms with my own sensitivities. And something I see in many clients today is that being very sensitive, I was often told, don't be so sensitive, and
what you're feeling must not be real.
And so I almost thought that's something I need to get rid of. And so going down a different route, which is much more part of the real world. So I ended up working in creative industry for agencies in London mainly, and worked there for good over 10 years.
And you had a prolific career in that field. I mean, you have worked with some of the top global agencies in existence, and that to me is such a feat, to be a sensitive person and to carry yourself. So you must have had some powerful inner resilience that allowed you to walk through those years and then brought you to the next chapter.
Yeah, resilience is probably the word to use.
I say that because we have a lot of HSPs now being diagnosed, highly sensitive people.
Yeah.
And this can lead to some of us feeling like we don't need to engage in the world in its own standard ways. But actually, I find that highly sensitive people have enormous reserves of resilience if we choose to tap into them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. In my 20s, I don't think I had that awareness. So I was working ridiculous hours, extremely late nights, sometimes not leaving the office for days at a time, not even exaggerating. And I had just worked on a big project in Dubai, and that was a year earlier, and that was so stressful. And then the next year we won the same project, and I remember my manager coming to me and saying, "Oh, you can art direct that project in Dubai again." And I just instantly felt my heart just racing, and I thought, oh my God. It was a panic attack, which back then wasn't really a known thing. And that's when I realized something's not right. So my resilience was not aligned. Or I didn't even have the awareness that that's what I needed. And it wasn't until I left that company, had an opportunity to work in the Maldives for 1.5 years, and actually reconnecting with nature, being in a beautiful space, and just letting all that stress kind of unfold, just leave. It took about 6 months. I did design work out there, which was wonderful, but definitely a different pace. And that's when I was able to hear that inner voice again that I used to have as a child. And that was saying there's something else, but I didn't know what. So that's where my journey to hypnotherapy for me consciously began. I did end up coming back and continuing my work in the corporate field for quite a few years, but with these new techniques and modalities and sense of awareness that I'd learned to understand in the meantime. So until very recently, the work I've been doing has actually been much bigger than what I used to do. But what I can bring now is a completely different level of resilience, and also of just a different quality for the people that I'm working with. So, yeah.
So your journey with hypnotherapy has in effect strengthened your core sense of self, and without some of these beliefs that sort of put down your sensitivities, without those beliefs handicapping you anymore, you can bring this incredible stability to those sensitivities and actually walk with it.
Yeah. And with that comes the awareness that putting in place boundaries. So working differently, working more effectively, speaking up. That was a big challenge of mine, not just saying yes to everything. So all these things that I've managed to overcome and incorporate, that, I'm now able to work in a very, very different way than I did even 5 years ago.
So it's my understanding that you're balancing a lot of work in hypnotherapy with some occasional freelance work in the design world right now, which is actually a beautiful titration in life. Tell us a little bit about your training, because obviously you've had a transformational journey. Is that an intentional part of the training of a hypnotherapist, for them to engage in a transformational process of their own?
Again, I think it depends very much where you train and with whom. And when I made the decision to train in hypnotherapy, there were so many different approaches and different personalities. So I can only speak for the training that I've done, in which it's very much a place of you have to work on your own stuff. You have to bring awareness to what's going on within you. One, mainly so that when a client brings something up, you're not triggered. And secondly, because once we've worked through our own challenges, then we can bring that with us, and it changes our own energy when we work with people.
It does. We are constantly, as healers and therapists, expanding ourselves. And the minute we stop expanding, we should stop working.
Yeah, completely.
So it's a really wonderful way to be in this world in that sense. And I'm really happy to hear that your training really encompassed this on a conscious level.
Yeah.
I feel all training should, personally. And we'll have a lot better medicine in the world. What is the intersection between the allopathic model and hypnotherapy at the moment? I'm vaguely aware that hypnotherapy can be prescribed by general practitioners for smoking cessation, but I don't know if it's any deeper than that. Are there new inroads?
So, as far as my awareness, it has only been recently, it was in 2020 that the NHS acknowledged hypnotherapy. So that's, 3 years ago. So there's still a long way to go. The way that hypnotherapy is seen by the sort of traditional health model is the more relaxation and positive suggestion point of view. I did have a client very recently who has had years of therapy, and we've had 2 sessions together, and they just said, "This is so deep, I've never done anything like it." So that depth, the awareness that this way of working, I don't think that quite exists in the traditional health field, but it's for me just so vital for any healing.
Yeah, the only way forward, really, if we're to deal with the complexities that people are addressing right now in their lives. The complexity of family history, personal story, environment, toxicities, nutritional things. What is the scope of things that hypnotherapy can address? Can it work on some of those physiological things that are not emotion-based, but maybe based in the diet, or may have a basis in, like, say, I injured my knee, some of those more kind of, those probably have an emotional basis too. But
I mean, something that hypnotherapy has been used for in its history, even in 1829, so almost 200 years ago, it was used for the first recorded time in anesthesia.
Wow.
So there was a doctor who worked together with a hypnotist and a British surgeon, and they worked on a woman, and all she had for the operation was hypnosis. I don't think it was called hypnotherapy at the time.
Yeah. And this was surgery with like knives and
Back
scalpels.
then,
yeah.
it was pretty brutal.
Mm-hmm.
And the surgeon called Dr. Mayo, he, according to his records, he claimed that the lady, the patient, had no symptoms of pain whatsoever. And he said it definitely works. But when he was asked whether he would use this in his practice moving forward, he said no, because of the bad reputation it had. He would lose all his clients.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here we are at this new juncture where we are collectively arriving to where realistically the pharmaceutical methods are not going to be as robust for us as they were. You know, for example, antibiotics don't always work because the bodies have developed resistance against them. So we always need a new one, a stronger one. And I can see this would be the case with many things across the board, including pain medications and antipsychotic medications, etc. So if we are going to, as a population, need to move beyond synthetic chemicals for our healing, hypnotherapy, hypnosis, may play a part. I mean, how might we rediscover its possibilities?
Well, I mean, it's such an interesting time right now because I can feel that people coming to my sessions who've never had hypnotherapy before, many have never meditated or explored themselves on those deeper levels, and they're already engaging with their bodies as if they knew exactly what it was. So I think there's a natural sense of opening up that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So something I forgot to mention is also in my sessions I work very much with the body. So for me, the body, the mind, our energy, it's you can't separate it. And whenever we have an idea, a fear, an anxiety, something, it usually sits somewhere in the body.
Yes, we know this, that all sorts of physiological things are released from the body when it enters states of deep relaxation. And there are reservoirs, and each person is different where something will get stuffed. It's in the shoulder, or it's in the kidney, or it's in an ovary, or so, and even toxins. Maybe it's highly individual where those reservoirs develop in a system.
Completely. And when I do a hypnotherapy session, the starting point is always for me to understand the symptom they're bringing. Say it's an anxiety about a future event. When they're feeling that, when they're opening up to feeling that fear, that worry, where is it in the body? Stomach, chest, head, feet, wherever that might be. And then that is used as the carrier, the messenger, that will almost sort of take us back to when that first came about. So the body is the vehicle. And then once we've done the work, whether it's inner child work, then coming back to that moment. So imagining that you're standing in front of a room of 20 people and you have to introduce yourself or give a speech. What does your body feel like? If we've actually resolved it, that will have shifted, and instead of a dark, heavy brick in their pit of the stomach, there will be a white light in the chest. And that's when I know that bit has been resolved. And So that's one way of looking at the body. But to come back to your question of more sort of physical aspects, the idea is still there. So the symptoms that people seek help with are nothing other than our body's way of communicating that something's not working, that something's not right. And those symptoms can be very different for the same cause for different people. And often people come to me when there's a point where they've tried a lot of stuff already, therapy, different medication maybe, but it's not shifting. And the good thing is that they've come to address it, but were they not to, that message will likely become more and more prominent. It needs to become heard, so that might then result in a more physical ailment. But even purely physical ailments that maybe do not have a emotional or mental origin can be addressed through hypnosis and hypnotherapy. The best example that we have of that is the placebo effect. So the placebo is a sugar pill that is used to test whether medicine is functioning, and people don't know often whether they're taking the real thing or the sugar pill. And there are many occasions where just the idea that they're taking a medication, even though it's a sugar pill, it's a placebo, still their body responds as though it was the medicine. And there's many studies that verify that. There's Bernadetti, who in recent years did a study in the Italian Alps, wanted to measure whether our oxygen levels would create different hormonal releases based on our beliefs. So there's a hormone called PGE2 which gets released when we have low levels of oxygen. So what they did was they took people to high altitude levels where they needed an oxygen tank because the air quality was so different, so that with this oxygen they could then breathe better, have the oxygen they needed, so ideally their PGE2 levels remained low. But what they were testing was if there was no difference and the oxygen was exactly as it was in the altitude, where they would naturally have to increase the PGE2 levels, their body actually responded as though they were receiving the levels of oxygen even though it wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that blows my mind, because as humans, we are capable of so much more. And this is a collective belief that we are so limited in our ability. We know that monks can lower their heart rate with their breath. We know that we can change the circulation of our blood, which has to do with our heart, that with our minds we can lower our brain waves into deeper states of relaxation. So why wouldn't we influence our respiration, even our ovulation, many things? The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
So can you make it explicit for us how this placebo effect is connected to hypnosis?
So in a very simple way, it's the idea that we have that something is going to make us better, and the belief in that we put in it, that actually has the physiological result, the cause. So whether we take that medication or not is, I'm not going to say it's irrelevant, but in many instances it shows that it can be.
Okay, and this ties in with what I was saying about moving beyond the need for medications.
Yeah.
And so is this more to do with the positive suggestion aspect of hypnosis? Is there a part of hypnosis where we're building belief? I'm guessing there is, but I'm guessing from my work with shamanism that there is also another route happening where we're not building belief so much, but we are allowing a new belief to emerge, like the white light in the chest. It may not have a whole set of language and words around it, yet it is in existence, and it creates a new way of life happening for us and through us and with us.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's that approach of allowing rather than prescribing the thoughts. So the approach that I have is by creating that openness and allowing the client to really connect with their own state of truth. These things can come to the surface. I guide them, of course, but the more that comes from them, the more real that's going to be for them. And there's other approaches of hypnotherapy which are much more prescribed, which also has its use, but that tends to not be the way that I work.
I've got two burning questions for you. So I'm going to go for the deep question first. Is there a potential for hypnosis to work on a collective scale and with collective belief?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, does hypnosis really work? I don't think you can hypnotize me. So there's two approaches with that. One is everyone has experienced hypnosis in their lives. So something everyone can relate to is watching TV and just zoning out. That's why the adverts that are played on TV, because they're
Right.
So our brain waves are shifting, so that's a big part of hypnotherapy, is changing our brain waves to that more relaxed state, like a meditative or trance-like state. So rather than in beta, which is when we're engaged, talking, active, they become lower brain waves, or more like longer waves. And that's when we're more suggestible. It's also when we're more in touch with our intuition. So that's the place. And another example is when we're driving in the car and 10-15 minutes go by and we arrive at home and think, how did I just get here? It's just been on autopilot. So that state. And the other state is roughly the first 7 years of childhood. So when a baby is born, they're mainly in delta, which is that sleep-like state. And then as they grow in consciousness, those brain states become theta, alpha, and that's where they kind of spend most of the first years of their life. And that's why things often come back to childhood, because that's when we're suggestible. That's the states they're in. And
wow, so we could go into places of collective healing, which has huge implications, by entering into different brainwave states together without needing to take anything into our system to do that, but through a collective hypnosis. Which is actually maybe what drumming can do if I'm thinking about it. But what if this were applied, for example, to collective healing of trauma from war, or collective healing to trauma from a nuclear spill, like happened in Chernobyl or in Fukushima, where there's been lasting damage, or after the atomic bomb, or after civil war. There is collective grief that is carried by populations, and lots of different collective healing that can happen. I'm just really curious in talking with you. I didn't think about this before. Can hypnosis be done on a group scale through very simple methods? What would be the issues around that? Safety, consent, the style, trust would need to be established. But some interventions could be
held. And that is where it almost crosses into that idea of group meditation with intention. But from that perspective, creating a new kind of reality together, a new belief form together. And I guess the flip side of that, which we have experienced in history, is propaganda, where beliefs are used and applied in a way for society and groups of people to make them think and believe a certain way. And that's done through subtleties, through advertising, through repetitive use of certain language and words in different places, different media. So that's the shadow side that we have been experiencing.
Well, there's a lot of possibilities there and a lot of new things to think about. And I feel like I want to digest this conversation over time, for certain. And I really appreciate the scope of viewpoint that you bring and the depth of care, which I can really feel in your presence.
Thank you.
My second question is completely practical. When a person comes for hypnosis and they've never been before and they think, actually, this is calling to me and I know it's the right therapy for me at this time and I'd like to try it. You've said you have a consultation, but how do you actually hypnotize them? I assume you're not swinging a pendulum in front of their eyes.
No, exactly. So the actual hypnosis, to some level, it starts the point that the person decides to come to the session. So in hypnotherapy, we work with free will. And so when someone says to me, I bet you can't hypnotize me, I say, you're probably right. Because it's someone wanting that change, wanting and allowing that is the first step. And them booking that session is them opening up to that hypnosis. Then there's a bit of preparation. They might be a little bit nervous before, so all these things are totally normal. And the hypnosis part of the session is very gentle. And it's actually just helping someone relax into themselves, focus their attention inward, shifting those brain states from the beta levels to the alpha and theta.
Through your voice, through guided visualization. Is there soft music? Are you filling the air with incense?
No music, no incense, just my voice. And I think the other quality is the practitioner's presence is very important. So holding that level of relaxation in myself, which is something that I've really come to understand and really value the importance of actually through working with you in neutral space relaxation. So that place, I've become to realize that's been a big part of these sessions, because their nervous system is adapting to what
you are embodying. Yeah, so from the neutral space relaxation perspective, we would say that there is an electromagnetic communication happening between the cellular body of the person in front of you and yourself, which we're often unaware of. But when we fully drop into what we call neutral, which is a place of core relaxation, that's the best way to describe it, their body senses it immediately. And then coherence starts to form, and safety can happen, trust, and then they can go on their own journey, which happens on the bodywork table. And at that point you start bringing in the words and the guided visualization to take them into the hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a beautiful blending.
Yeah. And the other part is when we're in dialogue and we're going to that point that they want to work on that's still unresolved, accessing that, they'll just go deeper naturally.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different touch points in the session.
I mean, some of the physiology behind the neutral space relaxation work has to do with the nervous system and this very well-known way of titrating between sympathetic and parasympathetic, and taking us out of that sympathetic loop where we're reactive and into parasympathetic where there's no need to react, where there's spaciousness. We can see this connected to like Zen meditation and Tai Chi in the state of non-doing. But that has a very real basis in the nervous system. And it's just really occurring to me in talking to you that part of hypnotherapy is a titration between reactivity and non-reactivity. And so if there were research done and studies, we might want to look not only at heart rate palpitations, temperature levels, brain waves, but also at what's happening in the nervous system. This could be really exciting.
Yeah.
It's been so wonderful talking to you. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners that I might not have asked about, or that's coming through you at this moment?
I think we've covered quite a lot. I think the other thing to mention would be, that it's just, it can be so transformative. And I think what I'm experiencing now more than before is clients understanding that even though one session might be shifting a lot in them, that it is ongoing. And that it's not something that's just a one-time fix, but it's actually, it's once we experience greater awareness, we can't unknow. So it's how do we move through with that expanded viewpoint in our existing framework of life, so that there is practices to incorporate. I've noticed that clients naturally just reflect more, that they're becoming more aware of people around them and their responses and how that's making them feel and all these little things. So it's not just the session, it's also the ongoing work that then happens afterwards that's important.
Right, because if they're having a neurological change in their structure during the session, then they're going to see the implications of that in their life in a big, long, slow way. From your perspective, is an ongoing tracking of that or an integration process, is it useful? Is it necessary? Are there just such an infinite way to engage that we don't need to track it actively?
Yeah, it's so different from what I've observed with different people. It depends what their level of healing is, the process they're at, their level of awareness at that point. As to sometimes it might be they've actually consciously figured a lot of it out, they just need help moving through it. And they're already there, really. And other times it's whole new connections that are made, and that might need more of a active shift and implementation afterwards. Because when we change, our relationships change, for better or for worse. And sometimes people change with us, move with us, and sometimes they don't. So, and that's what we're opening up to in this process of self-exploration and development.
And as you say that, I'm understanding relationships also is not just human relationships. Those are essential and the core, but our relationships with nature and our earth will also shift. And once again, those implications are huge in terms of our response to climate change, not coming from a prescribed set of actions or a set of technological interventions, but from a new way of relating that naturally causes different ways of interacting.
Yeah, completely.
Right.
And that touch point on nature is so crucial, because that is, in most of my sessions, that will come up for clients as their safe space, their healing place, their where they feel happiest. And aware of it or not until that point, that is probably the one homework I give to everyone. Being in nature and finding ways to actively encourage that in their lives.
Right, which makes perfect sense, because your time in nature was the beginning of your opening and integration of your core self within this life.
Completely, yeah.
And our access to nature is so vital. We need to touch trees. We need to sit on the earth. We need to, it's not just about looking at images of nature on a screen, which is a different hypnosis process. Slightly shadowy perhaps. But because touching nature is so different.
Being in it, feeling it, smelling it. And just with that, the awareness that these are all living beings and we're a part of that world. And that shift from I'm an individual having this life and this experience to we're all responding to each other, including nature and animals and whatever's going on in the sort of higher political and societal spheres, that we're all a part of this. So these big things to shift, big things to learn.
Well, there's so much to let pass through our systems as we come to the close of this podcast. I'm definitely going to listen to this one again a few times.
Me too.
If people would like to access some of the research that has been done on hypnotherapy, perhaps the school that you trained with, or they would like to see you for a session, will you be happy to have those links in the comments below?
Absolutely. It'd be a pleasure.
And Sara works in Sussex and Brighton, but also in many places around the world these days, so do reach out to her from wherever you are. It's been such a joy, Sara. Thank you so much.
Yeah, such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Do contact me if you're interested in being on the podcast. If you have something wonderful to share, I would love to hear from you. Many blessings.